The mark was small, faded, labeled in looping script, the Unreachable Village. No modern trail guide had ever mentioned it. No travel blog had ever posted a photo. For months, it had been nothing but a footnote in a 1920s survey report. He lifted his satellite communicator, flipped it open, and waited for the signal bar to lock. It never did. The screen stayed blank. No GPS ping. No stored recent satellite imagery of the valley below. Just empty black. He folded the device back into his pack, adjusted the weight on his shoulders, and started down the slope toward where the mark sat. He moved slow, testing every loose rock before putting his full weight down, because the slope dropped off sharp to his left. He climbed for 3 hours, winding through pine and loose scree, before the slope leveled out under his boots. He stopped. Silence hit him first. No wind moving through pine boughs. No birds calling. No distant stream. Nothing. He'd walked 12 days through empty mountains, and he'd never heard silence this complete. He stepped forward, onto the village's flat ground, and scanned the row of stone houses stretching out ahead of him. He scanned the tree line behind him, trying to trace the route he'd taken down. The path vanished almost immediately into thick pine and loose rock. He leaned forward, craning his neck to see the full length of the trail he'd descended, and his breath caught. The only route in wasn't a proper path at all. It was a narrow ledge, no wider than his shoulders, carved straight into the side of a 2,000-meter cliff. One wrong step, one loose stone, and there was nothing below but empty air. No car had ever driven within 10 kilometers of this place. No mule had ever carried a load up that ledge. Everything anyone brought here had to be hauled by hand, one trip at a time. He thought back to the mountain town he'd left 3 days earlier, to the round of local guides he'd asked about the village. One by one, they'd shaken their heads. One old man had leaned in, knocked his knuckles 3 times on the wooden table between them, and said no one had left that village alive in 70 years. He'd said the whole population simply vanished, and anyone who went looking vanished too. The hiker had laughed it off then, called it an old mountain legend, paid for his tea, and left. Now, standing on the village's empty flat ground, staring up at that death-trap ledge, the laugh died in his throat. No one had left alive in 70 years. No signal, no recent images, no one to hear him if he called for help. He'd walked straight into a story no one had ever come back from to tell. The hiker pressed his palm against the nearest stone wall to steady himself. The rock was cold, even through the fabric of his glove, worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. He swallowed hard, forced his clenched muscles to relax, and reminded himself he had enough water for 3 days, enough emergency gear to call for rescue if something broke. He still had nothing to lose by walking a little further. He pulled his hand off the wall and stepped onto the packed dirt path that ran between the rows of houses. His boots crunched over loose gravel and dry pine needles that had blown in from the forest above. The sound was too loud. It bounced off the stone walls and echoed back, sharp and unnatural, because there was nothing else to mask it. He paused, tilted his head, and listened again. No barking dogs, no roosters crowing at the sky. No children yelling or adults calling across the village. No wood being chopped. No water running in a bucket. No smoke drifting from chimneys, so no crackle of open fires. Even the mountain wind, which had whistled around his ears the entire way down, dropped to nothing inside the village boundary. It still blew above the stone roofs, stirred the pine tops on the ridge, but down here, it might as well have been frozen solid. He cleared his throat, just to make a sound of his own. The noise died in the air before it traveled 10 feet. He swallowed again. The silence pressed against his eardrums, heavy and warm, like being wrapped in wool that wouldn't let any sound through. He lifted his boot, took another step down the path toward the nearest house. The hiker kept walking. The hiker stopped 3 paces from the door. He lifted one hand to rest on the doorframe, and his fingers brushed splinters that had flaked off the weathered wood. He opened his mouth to call out, to announce his presence to anyone who might be inside. The words died before they left his throat. He knew there would be no answer. He still forced the words out, quiet at first, then louder. "Hello? Anybody home?" The sound hit the inside of the house and vanished. No echo, no response. Just the same heavy silence that had wrapped around the village since he stepped onto the flat ground. He curled his fingers around the edge of the door. The wood was dry, worn smooth by decades of hand contact. He noticed his knuckles were tight, his hands shaking just enough to be noticeable. He breathed out slow, pulled the door toward him. The wooden hinges creaked, a high, thin noise that cut through the silence like a knife. The door swung open wide, and the hiker stepped across the threshold. The single room opened before him. The wooden table sat dead center, scrubbed clean by years of use. Right in the middle of it sat a half-eaten loaf of bread. One edge was broken off, crumbs still scattered across the tabletop where the knife had cut through the crust. Next to the loaf sat a clay teapot, its spout turned toward an empty cup. He stepped closer, slow, his boots making no sound on the packed dirt floor. He leaned in. The tea inside was still steeped, dark at the bottom of the pot, cooled all the way through by decades of mountain air, but it had never been poured out. A woven shawl lay folded neatly on the wooden chair pulled up to the table, as if its owner had just stood up, brushed off their hands, and stepped out for a moment. The hiker backed out of the first house slowly, pulling the door closed behind him as quietly as he could. He didn't want to disturb the frozen scene inside. It felt wrong, like stepping on a grave that hadn't been closed yet. He wiped his palm on his trousers, turned, and walked toward the second stone house down the path. This one had a stone threshold worn smooth by hundreds of feet, crossing it every day for generations. He pushed the door open, slow, already braced for decay, for scattered belongings, for any sign that time had moved forward here. He stepped inside. Grain sacks sat stacked unopened in the corner, their coarse fabric still intact, no holes gnawed through by mice. A wooden spinning wheel stood by the window, half-spun wool still clamped tight on the spindle, the strand waiting for someone to pick it up again. The fire pit in the center held cold ashes, no embers left for decades, but the iron cooking pot hanging over it still held half-cooked lamb stew, thick with root vegetables, never stirred, never eaten. He left the second house, checked the third. It was the same. A wooden bowl of washed wild berries sat on the sill, still holding their shape, dried hard, but never touched. He checked the fourth. The same. A needle still threaded with red wool sat stuck in the edge of a half-finished tapestry stretched on a frame. He kept walking, house after house after house. He counted under his breath as he went. 10, 15, 20. He stumbled over a loose stone outside the 23rd house, caught himself on the wall, and his breath came fast. Every single one, every single house held intact furniture, intact food, intact tools. No scattered belongings tossed across the floor in a panic. No bones left behind where people fell. No sign of disease, no sign of struggle, no sign of any violence that could have taken a whole village. The hiker leaned his back against the stone wall of the last house and stared out across the village. The flat clearing held a wide central square, worn smooth by generations of feet. He pushed off the wall and walked across it, boots scuffing the packed dirt. He turned in a slow circle, counting the rooflines one more time. 27 houses. Not one had a single villager inside. Not one held a single clue to where they'd gone. He spotted the stone common building at the far end of the square, its wide entrance open to the air. He walked toward it, thinking it might hold a record, a log, a final note scrawled on a wall that would explain what had happened. He stepped through the entrance. Long wooden tables ran the length of the room. Loaves of bread sat stacked on wooden boards, baked and left to cool. Large clay jugs of water sat lined up against the wall, their corks pulled out, ready for anyone to pour a drink. He walked the full length of the room, checked the storage cupboards along the back. They held sacks of grain, jars of preserved fruit, crates of dried herbs. Nothing else. No bodies, no notes. No sign anyone had even panicked when they left. He stepped back out into the square and froze. For half a second, he swore he heard a voice, soft, behind him. He spun around, hand reaching for the knife at his hip. The silence swallowed the sound before it could fully register. Nothing moved. No wind stirred the dry grass at the edge of the square. No bird called from the mountains above. The hiker turned away from the well, his boots crunching on loose gravel as he followed the worn village path toward the far end of the clearing. The path ended here, where the cliff dropped away straight down 2,000 meters to the valley below. He walked slowly, eyes scanning the ground for any sign of foot traffic, any sign of people moving off the cliff edge in a mass. The mountain wind picked up as he neared the drop, whipping across his face, carrying the sharp tang of pine and cold stone. He stepped over a loose chunk of rock near the edge, his boot slipping an inch, and his hand shot out to grab a gnarled juniper bush growing from the cliff face to steady himself. His heart hammered against his ribs for 10 long beats before he let go and moved forward again. The rocks cleared, and he stopped. Arranged dead center on the flat patch of ground between the last house and the cliff edge was a perfect circle of rough-cut stone markers. No carvings, no names, just smooth, weathered stone, each one the same size, spaced exactly the same distance apart. He stepped closer, counted under his breath as he walked the perimeter of the circle. 1, 2, 3. He kept going, stepping between markers when the circle closed in, his finger tapping each rough surface to make sure he didn't count the same one twice. 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 115, 116, 117. He stopped counting, his finger still resting on the last stone. It matched. The last census had recorded exactly 117 villagers living in the village, one marker for every person, all arranged in a perfect circle, right on the edge of the drop. No one had moved them. No wind had shifted them. The arrangement was deliberate, intentional, left for anyone who found the empty village to see. The hiker marked the location on his handheld GPS, packed his gear, and hiked back out the same narrow cliff trail he'd come in on. 1 week later, he stood at the village edge again with 4 local rangers, all of them carrying ropes, climbing gear, and full search packs. The lead ranger laughed when he saw the circle of stones, said the whole story was exaggerated mountain lore, that a group of villagers would have left a clear trail somewhere. They split up to cover the entire area. 2 rangers rappelled down the full 2,000-meter cliff face, checking every ledge, every cave opening, every crack that could hold a body or a hidden path. They called up from every 100 meters, reported nothing but bare rock. 2 more rangers cut through the dense forest that wrapped around the village on every side, marking their route with flagging tape so they wouldn't double back. They searched for 3 full days. They checked every old trail, every overgrown gully, every possible exit off the mountain plateau. The lead ranger theorized a landslide had buried the lower trail, taking the entire village with it when they tried to leave. They followed the ridge line for 10 kilometers in both directions, searching for any sign of a slide. There was nothing. No loose debris, no shifted earth, no broken trees half buried in mud. The entire plateau was solid, untouched, no record of a major slide in living memory. The rangers filed back out along the narrow cliff trail, the hiker right behind them. The story leaked out to the outside world within a month. Expeditions followed. Researchers, adventurers, mystery seekers, all of them trekked the 3-hour cliff trail to see the empty village for themselves. No one has ever found a new clue. No one has ever turned up a single piece of evidence that wasn't there on the day the first hiker pushed open that first wooden door. Decades have passed since that first discovery. The half-eaten loaf of bread in the first house crumbled to dust within a decade. The half-cooked lamb stew rotted away to nothing in its pot. The cooled tea dried up and stained the bottom of the clay teapot. Then the stain faded to nothing when the clay cracked through winter after winter of freezing and thawing. The woven shawl on the chair rotted through, thread by thread, until nothing was left but a faint discoloration on the wood. The half-spun wool on the spinning wheel fell apart. The grain in the unopened sacks turned to dust that blows out through the cracked walls when the wind comes, but everything else stays. The wooden tables and chairs stand where they were left, their surfaces worn smooth by wind, but their legs still solid, their seats still flat. The stone walls hold. The doors still swing on their hinges when the mountain wind blows through the empty rooms. Even the 117 stone markers on the cliff edge are still there, still arranged in that perfect, deliberate circle. Each one is still the same size, still spaced the same distance apart, still one marker for every single villager who vanished. No theory has ever stuck. To this day, no one can explain what happened. The mystery remains as untouched and as solid as the stone markers that wait for anyone crazy enough to walk the 3-hour cliff trail and see it for themselves.